Welcome to Semi-Sages of the Pages.
Get ready.
Because it's time to turn the page.
Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Semi-Sages of the Pages.
Woo!
This time, you can't see us, but we are joined by a special guest, Chris Banner.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, yeah, so we should introduce ourselves. This is Molly.
And I'm Teresa.
And I'm Chris.
As you heard, again, Morgan couldn't join us tonight. We send her our best wishes. But to kick us off tonight with our episode, Chris, do you want to give our listeners a little insight into who you are, what your background in writing is?
Hi, everyone. I am Chris Banner. I just want to first say thank you guys for having me on the podcast. I've been listening since you guys started. So when you guys asked me on, I was very excited to be a part of it. I am a speculative fiction writer. I write LGBTQIA characters in fantasy and science fiction, just about anywhere. I don't like to limit myself to genre too much, so you can pretty much find me anywhere. Currently, I'm almost exclusively working on Kindle Vella. I've got 5 series up on Kindle Vella right now. I have
5 series.
Yeah, 5.
5. One is on hiatus right now for a couple weeks.
And I will also add to this because the thing about Kindle Vella, so Chris and I kind of have different things where I will write one and then end it, and then I'll move on to another one and then end it. Chris just has 5 continually going, and that is so freaking hard and amazing.
Thank you. It's fun. I'm having problems keeping up right now. I'm trying to get caught up for next month, but I'm learning. It's a process. Mm-hmm. It's just trying to keep going and keep chugging away at it and learning what works, because I'm still new to trying to do the serial fiction long-term like this.
Yeah. And the other thing I will give Chris a shout out for, she is a fantastic short story writer. And she has been, I don't even know how many anthologies you have been in.
I don't know either. It's over 50.
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of started going into, most of what I've been doing have been projects where I've been invited into it. Or I have a couple projects that I'm not really talking about that I kind of was leading, pulled some authors into it, and those should be coming out soonish. So I'll be able to talk a little bit more about those. But I love short stories. It was when I started writing, it was a good way to kind of jumpstart. I won't say my writing career, but kind of jumpstart my, hands dirty in the publishing field, because you spend so much time writing a novel, and I wanted to be more in submitting right away and learning what was happening. And I felt like I learned more on the business aspect writing short stories. Whereas now, as I'm contemplating, I just finished season 1 of my Vella 531, and I'm looking into turning that into a book. So now I feel like I have so much more information about how to do that. If I had tried to do that 3 years ago when I decided to start writing, I would have been so completely lost and making the worst mistakes. And I'm sure I will make plenty, but they will not be the same ones I would have back then. So
I think that's writing progression right there. You still make mistakes, but maybe not the ones you made at the beginning. Now you make new, different mistakes.
All new mistakes all the time. But, it is what it is. We have, you have every time you learn something, you take it up to the next step, you take it up to the next level. And that's a whole new level of trouble. So you just got to go with it and learn as you go.
Well, that's just life. I mean, that really is just the key to life. You just kind of have to be like, okay, well, that didn't work. I learned from it. Moving on.
Exactly.
And I do want to make a note here about plateauing, because I think it's common in writing, and I think it's common in many many hobbies that people might have. And what happens kind of is your awareness of your abilities increases faster than your abilities do, more or less. Or you try to jump that next level and you're not quite there yet. So you typically find that you're not performing where you want to be performing, and you feel like you can do better, and you feel like you're stagnating, or you feel like, you can what good execution looks like. And then you look at your own page that you've written, you're like, this isn't it. I know it's not it. I know what the good stuff looks like, but I can't get there. I don't feel like I'm getting there. Or, stagnation looks different for different people. You feel like you're not progressing. And if anyone's going through that, 1, we all go through it. 2, I found you never reach a point where you're suddenly, we'll never go through it. It comes and goes in waves.
Damn it.
And the only thing I've found to get through it is you just have to keep going. Like, you just have to keep going and pushing through. So, I mean, hopefully that was relevant to some things, but I know there's 2 or 3, maybe 4 of my writer friends who are currently feeling like they're in one of those stagnation periods. And so I just wanted, it's around the holidays, it's winter, it's colder. A lot of people just did NaNoWriMo. And now a lot of people have to deal with, what's next? What do I do next with myself? And that can be hard. And the only answer is you just have to keep going.
Now you edit or get an editor. Probably edits.
Edit is an invaluable skill that we should all have.
Edit, then get an editor.
Exactly.
That's actually, you're not wrong. I guess it depends on what you're going to do with the piece.
Mm-hmm.
True. No, I did go through that period of stagnation. I found when I tried to go from short story to going back to novels.
Yeah,
because there is this really interesting thing when you're writing short stories that, for me, like, you get the acceptance or the rejection fairly fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a really good, 2 years writing short stories where I was in a lot of anthologies. So it's this nice little pat on your back telling you, great job, you did something, you've accomplished something. And then I went to, I'm going to focus on, editing this novel I'd already completed and trying to start a new one. And that pat on the back is gone.
Yeah.
It's just me and my willpower. And I was not so great with that. I needed that, like, reassurance that I was still on the right path. And I did not have that. So I really kind of I almost feel like I lost a year of writing because I couldn't quite get past that. I didn't know how to deal with that.
And that's so fascinating to me that you found Vella, because I have found that Vella has forced me to write, forced me to be like, just put down 800 words and figure it out. Because you have to continuously post unless you're done with it really and truly to get some good momentum going. And it's forced me to be like, okay, good enough. And then there's also the immediacy of, oh my gosh, look at how many reads I got. Oh my gosh.
Thumbs up. Look at that thumbs up.
Look at the thumbs up. Did I get a crown? What was my payout? Because we get payouts monthly. Mm-hmm. So what was my payout? And so you get that immediacy with that, with Vella, same as you do doing short stories. That's fascinating.
That really kind of kicked me back into gear. I pulled up an idea that I had been like stewing in the back of my head for like 2 years. I'd had an idea for a cyberpunk story for an anthology I wanted to do. But it was too similar to another cyberpunk story I was working on at the time. And I couldn't pull them apart. So it just kind of got shelved. And then, so when I was like, oh, I'm going to give this a try, I'm going to pull up this story that I've wanted to write for so long. It was supposed to be like 30 episodes done. And I came up to about 25 and I was like, oh, they've decided they're not done. So we're going to do season 1, which I'm horrible about that. So we're doing a season 1 and, we finished season 1 with episode 30 and then we're going on to bigger problems.
I love it.
But it really did, like, as soon as I did that one, I was like, oh, but I need to tell a fantasy story. And I got a fantasy story going. And then I was like, well, I have this old story that's been sitting in my email box. And it should probably come out to see the light of day at some point. And so that came out. And in October, I just started 2 more ones, like dystopian, post-apocalyptic. And one is just short story, romance short stories.
Actually, I love that one.
It's a challenge for me because I write romance into my stories, but I don't really write straight romance. And that's kind of what I want this to be. So this was very much a challenge to myself to try to write short stories that are pure romance. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, and the rules for having a straight romance are different than the rules for having romance as a subplot.
Yes.
And I think that kind of turns our page to our first topic we wanted to get to today, which is our craft topic. And we wanted to talk about sub-stories in your work. So B plots, C plots, things like that. Because so often, I don't know about you guys, but so often when you start with a story idea, maybe you start with characters, maybe you start with that main plot, but mostly, especially when you're writing long form, there are subplots. There's other things happening. There's a romance also built in. There is a secondary, stakes going on. There's somebody else's story that's happening. There's different things happening. And so we wanted to talk about, how do you decide what gets added? Are you going to have a romance subplot? Are you going to have, the best friend trying to make the sports team subplot? Like, you are in control of your world, so you can do whatever you want. How do you pick what to include and what not to include, and what's going to complement that main story of yours?
Yeah. And that's a really good question, because it's easy to fall down rabbit holes, isn't it? It's easy just to start tugging and to be like, ooh, did the best friend make the cheerleading team? Oh, I don't know. Oh, there's cheerleaders. How many cheerleaders are there going to be? Oh,
now I need to make every cheerleader has to be his own character.
Exactly. And, oh no, they're cheerleading the football team. So, okay, shoot. Is there like some romance maybe going on between some of the cheerleaders and the football players? Maybe there's romance going on between the cheerleaders.
And is there a competition? Are the cheerleaders preparing for something at the end? Like, is there some sort of grand finale? Is there homecoming? Is like, what's going on with that? What's the ultimate goal of the cheerleaders?
Right. And so all of a sudden,
what's the motivation? Why does she want to be a cheerleader? Was her mom a cheerleader? Is she trying to recapture some glory? Like,
what's her relationship like with her mom? I mean, is her mom, does her mom want her to be a cheerleader, or is her mom super against her being a cheerleader? I mean, because her mom was a cheerleader before. So does she understand? I don't know.
Maybe her mom's pushing her too hard. Getting back to Buffy, there is a whole episode.
Our listeners, we had a Buffy discussion before we hit record.
Oh yeah, I thought you'd already mentioned it. There's a whole episode where it's basically a girl wants to be a cheerleader, and it's because like her mom is pushing. I think it's because her mom is pushing her to become a cheerleader.
Yes.
And that takes up a whole.
No, it is because her mom's pushing her to be a cheerleader, but her mom changes bodies with her.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Season 1.
Because she decides, I think her mom decides that the daughter isn't good enough to be a cheerleader on her own. So she like takes over her body to make her be a cheerleader and recapture her youth or something. Anyway,
subplots.
they can take over. And sometimes it's fun when they take over. And then sometimes you get to the end of your novel and you're like, well, this is a hot mess.
Mm-hmm.
What have I done?
Yeah. Or you're like, or you actually end up putting down the novel to go and explore a totally different direction when your novel was fine. Your original plot was good. Or maybe you've done that a lot of times and now you have 4 half-started novels. So what do you do? How do you choose which subplots do I pursue and which ones do I go, cool story, I'm going to set that one aside and focus on it once I'm done?
Well, I'm going to come at it from a slightly different thing because writing, not just serial novels, so like not necessarily an end in sight, but also the fact that I am completely a pantser. I don't plot my stories out. When I sit down to write, it's pretty much blank page. I have no idea what's coming. I might have an image in my head. When I started writing my post-apocalyptic story, I literally just had this image of this guy who like turns in front of a blast to protect somebody. That was like the only thing I had in my head. And I don't know if that will ever actually happen. But there's like a reveal in my head that is going to happen when that does. But that's it. I had nothing else going on it. So as I'm writing, like things just kind of come up.
Mm-hmm.
It's this idea that, you drop things along the way, little details, little bits and pieces. And as you're writing, something just pulls together, it pulls at the back of your head. And you're like, oh, wait. Remember that time this guy was talking about what his family was doing way back over here? How did that get pulled up over here? Where is this coming from? Where's that connection coming from? And then it starts taking on its own life and you just follow where it goes and see what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoy writing like organically like that, just seeing where things go and pulling the pieces together along the way.
Yeah, I think for me, I used to do no plotting at all. Like Chris. But for me, the challenge with that is I would write myself into places I couldn't get myself out of.
Yeah, I had that problem too.
Or I would write and write and write and I would never get anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like the story wouldn't go anywhere, or
there would be no arcs.
I wouldn't know how there'd be no arc. I wouldn't know how to finish it.
Mm-hmm.
Or then I didn't know where my story would and then I got to a point. So that was the first phase. And then I got to a point where I would get my character like to kind of the third act, not quite the third act, but like the middle of the second act, kind of into the second act. And it would become, I don't know how to finish it. I don't know what I've set up. I don't know where I'm going with this. And then another story, usually a story that was in the first story I wrote, a subplot or something like that, would be like, well, this is just more interesting anyway. This is more exciting. This is pulling at me more. And then I would stop writing and go write something else because I was just more captivated by another idea.
Mm-hmm.
So for me personally, I had to at least do a little bit of plotting. I had to know this is ultimately where the story is going to go. This is, and I don't plot a ton. I usually do like a bullet point list kind of thing. So I'm not deep plotting here, but I have personally, I'm now at a point where like I have to know where it's going to go or I will get lost along the way. And it's not like I'm wandering through the forest and I will eventually find my way out. It is, I will get lost and turned around and go nowhere. So I have to have something personally. So when it comes to like controlling subplots, I kind of have a two-pronged method. One is, you just kind of, for me, because I know where the ultimate thing is going to go. It is, okay, do I think this subplot, I've been talking a lot about this cheerleader and I've been talking a lot about she's gonna do this thing. Do I think that's ultimately going to further this story?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And if the answer is no, but I'm really interested in it, I might keep writing it and take it out later.
Mm-hmm.
Or if the answer is no, but maybe it goes somewhere in what might be a later book, maybe I'll keep it in anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And if the answer is just straight up no, 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 then I have to take it out. Then I have to say no. No, Molly. And I personally have to be a bit rigid with myself. And, and in early drafts, you can kind of go nuts, depending on who you are and what you want. But the more you go nuts, the more you have to edit later.
Yes. Yes. Yeah,
Right?
I agree with that.
True.
Yeah.
If you can't kill your darlings early, you'll have to do it later. Eventually,
when they're all
it will
grown
happen.
up and rooted. And sometimes too, those characters, even though you're like, you're not doing anything, they are.
Sometimes they are.
Yeah. And it's subtle. And they're adding just a little bit of color, a little bit of flavor. And then you cut them and you don't even realize that color or that flavor is no longer there, or that there's color or flavor further on that now doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So,
and that is the problem with like cutting too early. Mm-hmm. Like sometimes it's nice to just let it go for a little bit. You're like, well, I'm not sure why this cheerleader is here, but I'm gonna let her stay for a bit. Let's see what happens. And then, for me, and then usually by like the beginning of the third act, I'm writing and I'm like, oh, I could really use her right now. I really need like that character that comes in and has, messengers some information.
Yeah.
I need a character who tells someone to do something. And you can always like have a one-off throwaway character do that, but when you can have that character that's already slightly been in the plot, already had a very minor role, and then they come back and do it, you're like, oh, I know this person. I don't have to reintroduce the cheerleader. She doesn't do much, but she's here and she does, things here and there, and great. Awesome.
That was one thing I learned. I did a conference at one point, and we were talking about different types of characters. So it was very much on archetypes and that type of thing. But that was one thing that they really highly recommended, was that if you have a ton of little minor characters that kind of walk in, say something, or give some information, or open a door, do something, try to combine them together, because A, it's going to make your reader be like, oh wait, I know that person, cool. And B, sometimes those characters do end up growing over time and become a really true character that your readers can glom onto and really enjoy and be like, oh yes, my favorite character's back again. And you're like, that character was going to be a little one-off walk in and walk back out again. But you've used them so much that they've taken on a life of their own.
I mean, here's my example, which I've probably mentioned a couple of times by now on the podcast, but I'm working on a story right now. And I knew that there was this character who eventually I'm planning on it being a series. And I knew that there was this character who was going to come in later in the series, and he was going to be a main character later in on the series. But I didn't see how he fit into this story at all when I started writing. So originally he wasn't planned to be in this book at all. But I got to a point where they were at like this bookshop, and they needed an expert person to tell them random information. And I was like, oh, I know this character exists in this world. He would be an expert in this. I'll just have him here to tell him this information. And then later on in book 2, when they actually meet him, they'll be like, oh, I met him already. It'll be great. Wonderful. So I put him in just for that one little scene. And then I found, as I kept on working in the book, I was like, oh, I could use this character to tell them this information. Oh, I can use him to push this part of the plot forward. I can put him here. I don't have to have some random person here. I can use him again. And then suddenly he's like a main character in this book. And it just happens. and it works. And you're like, all right, well, thank you, my own brain, for helping.
And for those people being like, but that doesn't happen in real life. Like in real life, you do have 12 sub people around you that are just, giving you random information. Yeah, but we're not talking real life. We're talking fiction. And 12 random sub characters that really don't do too much, just get rid of them. It's okay. Yeah, it's too confusing for your readers.
I did have a big problem with that when I first started writing. Just bringing to be Teresa read the first novel I put out. It's not been edited since she read it the first time. And I had so many characters and so much needed to be redone because you literally just pantsing my way through over many years, as we often do on our first book. It takes us forever to figure out the process and how to get it done and how to come back to it. And, the process of writing that and having the too many characters and trying to look back over time to how do I get back to editing it? I look at it now and it's actually informed so much of me learning not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple characters that I introduced in 531 who weren't main characters who I'm like, okay, season 2, season 3, I already have ideas for how are they getting pulled back in. They were just these minor names, just these minor things, but I already know they're going to have to get pulled back into it because I need to not just keep throwing people at my audience, not just keep randomly throwing things out there. And I love the characters, the scenes they were in, I absolutely loved. So I'm like, yes, I need to keep pulling on these people and not just bring up a huge cast of characters that are just throwaway.
Yeah. And I think as well, so 2 thoughts. First of all, I think that's really important for serialized because people are, and some people will binge them, but the idea is that you read one and then a small period of time goes by and then you move to the next. So having a small cast, I actually think is very, very important. My other comment though, was with your novel. And I know, cause you and I had talked a lot about it. Part of the reason you had so many characters was that, the story was mostly told on an airship and you had hardcore thought through what crew do I need to keep an airship in the air? And then you were like, okay, I need all of these. I need these
Realism
crew.
got in your way.
Yeah. And then you built characters around him. And then you had the problem of, wait, I built this character. I need to get him into the story somehow.
That's a good point. You don't have to, everything you plan doesn't have to make it to the novel.
Yeah.
But that goes into that rabbit hole. How far down did I go to research what kind of crew I would need for the ship? But I know what I need. I have to have all these people on here. And then it's like, okay, well, yes, I do need those people on there, but they don't necessarily need to be a named character.
Right.
That gets that kind of screen time. Not every person needs those pages.
Right.
So picking and choosing which ones should get that focus. Not saying they shouldn't have any time, but knowing which ones need to have the bigger parts.
And so for me, when I'm back to the thing about picking what subplots I do, I like my subplot to involve the character arc or drive or motivation of one of the sub characters. So, and this can depend on if you have multiple point of view or if you have, one point of view, third person, first person, stuff like that. Because, if your first person point of view, your protagonist still has to be involved, So that's why, that's one reason. There are many reasons, but that's one reason that in, a tight first person, single point of view protagonist kind of view, a subplot a lot of times is romance. Because it involves somebody else, it progresses somebody else, and everybody likes romance. Right? They do.
And that's true. And a good romance can keep people turning the pages, and it can help when the middle gets a little bit soggy. okay, you know, the middle's a little bit soggy. The plot's starting to kind of a little bit. Let's throw the romance in. Let's start punching that up. Okay, let's keep turning the pages.
So here was my epiphany, right? Hopefully this makes sense. We'll find out. All right. So when you're talking about the plot of a book, right? The plot of the book drives that book. That's what you're focused on. But the sub-stories and the subplots drive the series.
Ooh.
So if you have a series, right? Not just a single book, you're planning a series. Oftentimes it's those subplots that are what's going to drive you through the series. So, right, we talked about Buffy. Romance is always, not always, but almost always in Buffy as a subplot.
Yeah.
And it drives you through and ends up making small characters bigger. It ends up, let's take Spike, right? A character who wasn't supposed to be around for very long and then got bigger and bigger because audiences liked him. And then his own personal journey got wrapped up in a romance until he became, debatably the penultimate and final season are a lot about Spike and his journey. So right, that drives you through. It's not just, it's always about the end of the world and the apocalypse and the vampire slayer.
There's always the monster, not even sometimes it's the monster of the week, but there's also an overarching story. Yeah.
And sure, we always have to defeat the monster of the week. Right. But that subplot of who's dating who and who's going to be with who, and is Buffy going to make the cheerleading team? Is she going to fail out of college? Is these things keep you cohesive and driving between episodes and between series.
Well, it's
those seasons,
much more personal, intimate storylines. The main plot of the story is going to be like this much more global impact, but it's those subplots that are keeping you coming in to say, what's going to happen next page, what happens the next chapter. Oh, we've hit this goal, we've hit, we saved the world, but this was their cost. What happens after that? What's the next story? So I can follow that and see where do they go from there. They lost the love of their life. How do they survive that?
Well, go ahead.
You bring up a really, really great point here, and I want to double down on it. If your stakes in your story are huge, like global impact, save the world type of stuff, I think it is really important that your subplot should be incredibly personal. I think that's really important. Otherwise, it's hard for readers when everything is big and hard to comprehend. That subplot being tangible and close and heart-wrenching, I think, is really, really powerful.
Human beings don't function. We're bad with numbers. 500 people are dead. Oh, that sucks.
What's the thing like the thing about tragedy versus like 1 million deaths is a number, 5 deaths is a tragedy.
Yes.
That's not the exact quote. That is not the exact quote.
No, that's exactly what it is. 500 people dead. You see, across a headline, 500 people died and blah, 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 blah. But what's the picture they show? One dead child. And that's what's like, yeah, that's what hits you.
I mean, do you guys remember, I'm not sure where you're at physically, globally, Chris.
Down the street.
But I lived in LA when Kobe passed away.
Oh.
And that was, I think there were 5 people on that helicopter. Kind of thing. Pilot, him, I think his daughter, a couple of friends type of thing. And the way that impacted people on a personal level, people who had never met him, never seen him in person, never talked to him. But it still hit hard personally for so many people. And especially in this area where he was such a fixture of the locality, and to watch people come out in mourning for, this very small but large tragedy that had really impacted people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So bringing it back to writing, when you're writing,
that was a downer. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. When you're writing about big, giant stakes, and so many of us are, because our characters are so large and we want them to be able to change the world, or we want them to have an impact in their circle or their lives. It is fun. Having those very intimate and very personal moments really does help. And that's where romance really comes in. Yeah.
And it doesn't have romance.
It doesn't.
But I think romance is probably the most common subplot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know for like for me, like writing, when you're writing fantasy and sci-fi, and these big epic adventures, or like just some of the adventures, like you can't imagine being out on a spaceship.
Mm-hmm.
You want to create that world and all that, but it's not something that touches your everyday life. Whereas like, your best friend down the street getting in a car accident and staying with them at the hospital, that's something you can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
So these subplots that are so much more personal and immediate to the characters, happening in this grand, huge landscape, it really does bring it back to more reality, more grounding in what the reader can experience. And again, I'll double down on the romance thing. I mean, how many people, are in a relationship or looking for a relationship? It's one of those common things we're all searching for.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, that's such a great pool to draw from. And it's such heightened emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think it's really important you bring this up. What emotion do you want in your story? And what emotion is your main plot driving?
Yeah.
And with your subplot, do you want to double down on that? Or do you want to hit different emotional points, right? That's another one with romance. Like if you're hopeless, and okay, but there's this romance, right? So even if it's not practical, like, oh, they've had this big fight and they're injured and they're all bloody, and then they see each other and, immediately start kissing and like go off to a bedroom. And you're like, you know what? We would all shower. Okay. We would shower and we would eat and we would sleep.
And be like, and be like, I hurt too much. Yeah. Don't touch me.
Please don't touch me. You can brush my hair. That's about where I'm at. But we don't care that it's impractical, because we need that post-battle moment, or we need that pre-battle moment, or whatever it might be. So that like, yeah, what kind of tenor, where do you want to hit your emotions, and what do you want to drive? And that romance can be so different than the main plot a lot of times.
And this is actually bringing an interesting point up too, because the thing about humans and emotions, so emotions are irrational. One moment we are high as a kite, being like, best day ever. Look at what I did. It's fantastic. I feel fantastic. I feel amazing. And then literally in like 2 minutes, we can flip the switch to pure and utter rage. Think about this. You're in the car, you're driving, you're singing along with your favorite song. You are so in the zone where you are like, it's euphoria. You're in that euphoric
and then someone
moment,
cuts you off.
And someone cuts you off and it ruins it. And you hit that rage of like, I'm going to get out of my car and punch that person, which I would never do.
Once again, Teresa does not speak for all.
Right. Could you, using subplots, kind of explore that And this was something I was editing somebody's book. And one of my feedbacks was, I'm like, this character jumps emotions way too much. And she said, yeah, but she's unstable. And I'm like, I know, but I'm kind of feeling whiplash here. And so we had to really try to work through it. But that's also very human. And a lot of how she worked through that was with some of the subplots.
That's once again the reality doesn't always make great writing.
Right.
And us as humans are irrational creatures whose emotions flip around all the time, sometimes for reasons and sometimes for not reasons. And sometimes we know the reasons and sometimes we don't.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't make always a satisfying character in a book.
Right.
Well-adjusted characters rarely make interesting characters.
Yeah, that's true.
Unless somebody is throwing a lot of stuff at them to keep them off their game. You know, you think of the best characters that, you know, the characters you love the most, they are generally not the best people or completely out of their element and shouldn't be where they are. Because if you just have a person who's really good at what they're doing and isn't, you know, is doing what they always do well, it just gets kind of boring.
It does.
I think
we need conflict.
There's different things.
That crisis.
We do, but I think there are ways. So like you can take Sherlock Holmes, right? He's very good at what he's doing. He's always doing very good. You know what I mean? I can't talk.
Yeah. He's doing his Sherlock Holmesy things. He's
doing his Sherlock Holmesy things. We know he's always going to solve the mystery or whatever. And we know he's super good at doing that. But then the flip side of it is he has poor social skills and he can't interact with people. And so that's another place, right? You get those subplots where, okay, we kind of know what's going to happen in the main plot. Sherlock is going to solve the murder or the whatever the mystery is. But is he going to be able to not offend so-and-so at the dance? We don't know. And, you know, is Watson going to have to like step in and figure shit out for him? Is he going to pay his rent? Because we don't know if he's going to remember to do that.
Right.
You know, those types of things where, again, this is back to, you know, what do you want your character to do? But maybe the challenge for your character is in the subplot. Which again, this is back to Buffy. Buffy, you know, becomes very good at being a vampire slayer. And it's not that she never faces challenges being a vampire slayer, because she does. But oftentimes, you know, many of the challenges in her world are the teenager stuff. Dawn
is a huge challenge for her.
The personal stuff. So yeah, your challenge can come from different areas, and you can challenge your character 100%. Like Chris said, you want your character challenged and you want conflict. And depending on who your character, nobody is perfect at everything. So you have to throw things at them that is going to challenge them.
And a lot of times the place to do that is in subplots.
And challenge them differently, right? Like you want, in many places, you want their world to fall down around them, right? So they're losing to the villain, right? There's an overarching villain, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. They're failing at school. They've got a secret because they're a secret vampire killer, and they haven't told anybody about it. And their friends all think that they're lying to them and betraying them. So they're losing all their friends. The romance isn't working out because whatever, their parents don't trust them anymore because they keep sneaking out. This is really common for like teen superheroes, actually. Is what I'm telling you, is like the teen superhero, like alternate, like people who have alter egos, stuff like that. You get them, you know, multiple points of their life are falling. They can't hold a job because they have to keep going out to save the world. They can't hold a relationship. They can't hold classes. They can't and the villain is winning. And so you get to watch their life like systematically collapse in all areas. It's fun stuff.
It's like, I mean, She-Hulk, because that's a great example of that. So anyways, should we turn the page, kind of take this a little bit over to industry?
Yeah, I think it's important. We talked about subplots, and one thing we mentioned was how important these subplots and these sub characters are to writing series.
Mm-hmm.
And we wanted to talk about as well with when you're writing series, how do you go and industry wise market and query, those series? Do you have to know ahead of time that you're going to write a series? I guess that's the first question. I'm gonna posit it to Teresa. Do I have to know it's going to be a series when I write that first book?
That's a really good question. So from a book selling point of view, if you would like to sell a lot of books, I would recommend trying to put it together into a series. We know series work really well. We know that readers will continue to come back to series over and over and over again. And authors will often find that they can write faster and put out more books in a quicker time frame in a series because they already know the characters.
The world and the characters are established.
They've done the back work already. It's already done. And so they don't have to keep on revisiting and being like, wait, what was that character's eyes color again? Or shoot, I have to go make up another character. And now I have to write a backstory for them too.
And now I got to explain how magic works in this world.
Exactly. It's already done. So if it is possible, I do recommend trying to write in a series. Now I find writing spec, it's easier to do series than writing like a general fiction. I think that's one of the powers of spec fiction. So if you're querying, and I'll kind of punt this back to both of you, since you guys have both done a lot of querying, if you're querying, should you think about writing it in a series? Will that make it more valuable to an editor or a publisher or an agent? Or are you wasting your time?
I personally, for me, I think anything I'm going to throw out there, I'm going to be, hey, if you're interested in more,
I can write more.
I can find more. I created a world for you. I can find something interesting in there to keep going. So I think just to open up the possibility, even if I had not intended a next book or, 2 more books or something, I think I would always have something in the back of my head and just let them know, there is potential for a series here. I don't want to shoot myself in the foot by saying, no, this is it, one and done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Favorite phrase here is standalone with serious potential.
Exactly.
So the reason there's 2 reasons, right? Because if you write, especially if you're a debut author and you say it's a series and you're writing a series where it's specifically like the first book has a cliffhanger or the first book doesn't make sense without a second book, an agent or an editor or whomever might get a little wary at that because you are unproven and untested, and maybe your first book won't sell. So they'll, there won't be a second book. You will never make it to book 2 because you won't sell enough of book 1, or for example, or maybe they don't know you as an author and they don't know, can she write a book 2? He or she, right? Maybe this will be all they ever produce. We don't know. They don't know you. They don't know what's going on. So when you say, all right, standalone with serious potential, that mitigates your risk on both sides. Because on the one hand, it's a self-contained unit. If you fail in the future, it doesn't matter. And also if you succeed wildly, like Chris said, I'm one of those where like, I'm always tying ideas together in my head. I'm always connecting things. I'm always like thinking about, okay, I couldn't include the cheerleader in this one, but I know the cheerleader story. I'll write a spinoff. You want me to write a spinoff? I'll write a spinoff, So yeah, I know that some people like specifically like, maybe it is a standalone. It's not a series. But for me, I'm with you, Chris. Like I can always write more. Like even if it's not a straight sequel, I could write a spinoff. I could pull in a different character. I could tell the story from a different perspective. I could I can work with the world I've created and create more content.
Right.
So that's not a scary thing for me to write. And oftentimes, like, I don't think of a lot of my stories as one-off stories anyway. Most of the stories I write, I think, okay, in my head, the character keeps doing things. The character keeps living and loving and having adventures.
As
and
we
I know
all
what
do.
those, yeah,
Life
as we all
didn't
do.
stop.
Life didn't stop. And I know what those adventures are. And I think it's also important, like when you are querying and stuff like that, you might not want to write that sequel right away. You might want to write another book 1 because it's more,
it's more fun.
It's really hard to sell a book 2.
You can't bank on it.
Yeah.
Right.
You kind of got to move past, see what else you can get out there.
Yep. If you haven't yet sold a book 1, how are you going to sell a book 2?
Right.
It's much more likely to hedge. You do yourself a bigger favor by hedging your bet and writing another book 1 of a different series. And then trying to sell 2 book 1s versus a book 1 and a book you can't sell because you can't really sell a book 2 easily unless you rework it or whatever.
Well, especially because, and I will say this because a lot of times, once an agent, editor, publisher, whatever gets their hands on the book, they're going to take it through developmental edits, and they may take it into such a direction that now your book 2 no longer works. So if you've spent a lot of time building that book, you've wasted your time.
Hey, we need you to kill this character in book 1 because they're just not working for us. And you've just spent all this time, and your subplot in book 2 is all about them.
Right.
And sometimes, like, I do want to say, like, you as an author are still in control of your story. But sometimes you get to a point where someone makes a suggestion to you and you come to the realization that they are right.
Yep.
Your story is better this way. It does work better. It does, do all this stuff. And then you look at your book 2 and you're like, well, it doesn't work now. I changed the climax. I changed this thing so that it would be more satisfying. I guess I'll put this in the shredder. No, you never shred, you never throw anything away. Right?
Nope,
you never
know.
Throw it away.
Never know.
But I think from an agent marketing standpoint, marketing yourself, right? Putting yourself out there. Not safest, it's the wrong way to put it. But, the standalone with serious potential is what's going to attract the most honey, so to speak. Right. Especially if you can do it. If it is truly a standalone and it's not a series, then don't say that, right?
Correct.
If you sit there and you're like, I don't think this is all I got. This is a one and done. I don't want to write like this is it. Then don't lie.
Right.
Like, don't lie, And if it's truly like a series where it goes from one book to the other and it's not a standalone, then again, don't lie. Don't lie. There's my takeaway.
We've all seen TV shows, because I'm seeing this more and more in TV shows, where a TV show that worked really well was Big Little Lies. And first season was fantastic. Huge hits. Everyone loved it. Everyone was talking about it. They forced a second season, and it was dreadful. It was for a show that was so empowering of women. The second series was not. That was awful.
Yeah. Forcing something when
it's done, it was done.
I mean, that's the same as like, it's similar, right? I think we've talked about Supernatural before, and it was the end of season 4, the end of season 5, where they literally like fight. They also had a power escalation problem, right?
They did.
Every season. Maybe we should talk about power escalation another episode, but every season gets like more and more powerful things that they're fighting. And then they have like this thing where they literally fight the devil.
Yep.
And it wrapped up so well and so nicely and left both of the characters like in place. Like the story was done.
Intentionally so.
Intentionally so. And it made sense and it wrapped up. And it was it was wonderful and beautiful, and then they brought it back to life, and now it won't die. And it's like, this is a hideous thing.
So I know Chris
love
is
a lot
a
of
huge fan of Supernatural.
I have been too.
I won't say it should have died because I love the show, but yes, they did wrap it up so nicely at the end of 5.
Because that was their plan.
There were certainly some very rough things going on for, and I loved the character so much I was willing to struggle through with it. But
well, it was funny because it did get rough, but then they just kind of like did just tongue in cheek, and they were like, well, it's going to be rough and it's going to be funny on top of that. Where they just started, I mean, they did a Scooby-Doo episode, for God's sakes.
I like, but they ended up in the alternate universe where they are TV shows.
Oh my God, that was hilarious. I loved that one.
Yes. I love changing channels. That was a great episode.
Neither here nor there. But okay, let's take book. Here's a book example, right? Like, you just have to decide. The point here is you just have to decide as an author where to take your series and where your series is ultimately going to go, because very few series last forever or last indefinitely. Let's say it that way. So, eventually you're going to have to like wrap up your series, and you're going to have to think about an ending, or, you die or you stop writing, which is not super satisfying for your audience,
Or they come back from the dead, again, referencing Supernatural.
I mean, I hope the author doesn't come back from the dead. That'd be a big problem.
Wait, that's an idea. We should write that.
I mean, you get some of these series that don't have
writers.
Like, definitive ends, and their family has to end up taking it over, or another author has to end up taking it over. Something like Clive Cussler, eventually, like his son took over some of it, has taken over some of it.
And McCaffrey. Her son started writing.
Yep.
Frank Herbert. I think is it his son or is his nephew?
I'm not sure which.
Some of that. Wheel of Time. Brandon Sanderson had to take over Wheel of Time.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think we talk about Harry Potter. That one had a very set, like you knew from year one, right? That it was like, okay, this is probably going to be 7 books. Yeah. There's a set format here. And you could kind of tell in like the 5th book, it almost seemed like in the 5th book, she was like, oh shit, I'm towards the end of this series. I got to figure out a way.
I got to stretch this out.
I got to figure out how to connect these storylines here.
Yeah.
And start to an end. You probably don't want to like get to 3/5 of the way through and be like, oh shit, how does this happen?
how do I get it all together?
Yeah. I've written myself into a corner again.
Yeah. Well, I think even as a serial writer, like I say, like I have no end in sight, but I know there is one. At some point, I am going to exhaust what I needed to do with these characters, where they're going. There's only so much you can put them through. Now, maybe I have to put that series aside and say, oh, but I love this world. I'm going to explore other avenues of it with new characters. Maybe somebody I've brought in for, an episode or two somewhere here and there, but at some point your characters are done.
Yeah.
At some point they either die and don't come back, or, they just have to settle down. They've got to just stop the traveling and the sword fighting and like whatever it is they're doing. At some point they end their story.
They have to take an arrow in the knee.
They get the happily ever after.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's we talked vaguely about romance, but romance can be a real problem in series.
Yeah.
Depending on how you handle it. Because typically, and it's not always an arc I agree with, but typically like the arc for a romance subplot or plot is that, they end up happily ever after at the end of the book, or happily for now. And at the beginning of the book, there is romantic conflict. They're not together for some reason. And it can be very I find very frustrating and unsatisfying as a reader, where you've just gone through book one and they've ended up in this very happy place.
Mhm.
And then you get to book two, and then the author like artificially tears them apart so that she can put them together. She
Put
or
them back
he or
together
they
again.
put them back
Mhm.
together by the end of the book. And there's only so many times an author can do that to a character before you as a reader are like, knock it off. They're together or they aren't. Or she's, the character's with somebody else. But like you cheer for these people. You want them to be together. And so you don't really want them to be broken apart. The one I'm really thinking of that really bothered me, this is a really random one, right? National Treasure. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
Yeah, you know what I mean, Chris.
Totally, yes.
Yeah.
They're arguing over the furniture.
Yeah. And it makes no sense because they had such like a functional relationship at the end of at the end of the first movie.
Mhm.
It made sense. They had all this stuff. And then at the beginning of the second movie, they were just like, no, they
broke
they're
up.
just not, they just broke up.
Yeah.
And it's like, why? They just did. They just started
Yeah.
arguing. You're like, why? And then, yeah, it was just like, what? Why?
One way, though, that I have seen authors get past this, especially if they're like, okay, these characters are united, they had their happily ever after, and I'm not going to break them up, is that they start tugging romances with other sub characters.
Yep.
And that's a good way to do that too. Especially if you can maybe pull in if you're writing a first person, you can kind of see, you get the ripples of the romance, but the best way to like actually dig into that is to write a separate novella. Just write a separate novella that just hooks those two characters up.
I will give props to Sarah J. Maas
Mm.
and specifically her series, Court of Thorn and Roses, that she actually does this really well. After the first novel, there is that first to second novel jump where they are happily for now at the end of the first novel, and then at the start of the second novel there's turbulence in their relationship. However, it's turbulence that makes sense, and it's not that it's not one of those things like National Treasure where they're just broken up and you're like, what happened? Like, you get to see the turbulence develop, you get to see how it progresses. And then by the end of book two and through like the rest of the series, the main character is steadily committed to the same person.
Mm-hmm.
And they're started as romance subplot, but by the end it's just like romance. Romance erotica, whatever. It starts as they are a steadily committed couple who, sometimes has disagreements, miscommunications, stuff like that. But they're a steadily committed couple. And like you said, you find like the quote unquote traditional romance subplot happens with some sub characters, or they find other ways to overcome it as a couple. But it's not that like, aren't they on again, off again stuff. It becomes much more of like they are a unit and they face the world together, which I do appreciate. I like that. For me personally, I like it when characters like work well together, specifically romantic partners work well together. They're comfortable and confident with each other. They're not like gonna fall apart. They're not gonna have all these miscommunications every 5 seconds that don't make sense but drive the plot forward.
Mm-hmm.
And instead they're external conflicts that they face together. I like that personally. It's something I like.
Yeah, I agree. All right. I think we might be time to start wrapping it up. Take us into our final one.
It is our race to rejection. And you would have thought that after all this time, I would have already had this pulled up. Well, you would be wrong because I didn't plan ahead. But I got it pulled up now.
We just do good showing up to record. I mean, props to us.
I'm here. That's good enough shouldn't it be good enough for you? All right. So it is, as we are recording this, December 7th. By the time this comes out, it will be almost the end of December. So there's just a little bit of time left for people to get their last minute rejections in here. And KJ Shepard is running away currently with 98 rejections, 2 more, and he hits that 100 mark.
Whoop, whoop.
For the year. That's not 100 overall. That's 100 on the year. And in a solid second place at 79 rejections is Richard. Nope. Yes, Richard. I can read columns, names on columns. We had a lot of people join this year, and I'm sure we're going to continue it on to next year as well. And it's been a enthusiastic and inspiring time. So hopefully I can rack up some more rejections next year. Maybe if I record all of my rejections, I might get to 3rd place.
There you go.
So watch out, Milan and Reed, who are currently in the battle for 3rd place.
Yeah,
I might be coming for you.
I saw Reed had a bunch starting to come in. So
he's going to try to lock that down.
So if you would like to, for 2023, be a part of our resolution warriors, where do they need to go, Molly?
They need to come to our Discord. That's where we keep track of this. This is where we meet up as a community. We celebrate those rejections. And, sometimes it's not always rejections. Sometimes it's acceptances. And we extra celebrate those. But yeah, Discord.
Go ahead.
No,
I was also going to say, Chris is on our Discord.
I am. I poke my head in every so often. Discord is kind of an issue for me because I lose time in Discord. Mm-hmm. But I do check in quite often to see where everybody is and look around and see what they're going. And I love seeing other rejections. The amount of bravery it takes to keep putting your stuff out there for every submission. It's just amazing. These are incredible people for keeping on, for just throwing them back out there. So you guys are awesome.
Yeah. And that's why we celebrate. We celebrate every rejection because it is so hard to keep putting yourself out there. So yeah, that's why we started this.
Well, you guys know where to reach us. You guys know how to like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff so you can find more of us. If you liked, if you like Chris Banner, you like what she has to say, you're interested in seeing what she does, maybe reading some of her stuff. Chris, how can they connect with you?
You can, easiest place to remember is chrisbanner.com. I've got all my social media up there for you, links to all of the anthologies I've been in, links to my Velas. Everything you need to know about me is at www.chrisbanner.com.
And
make it easy.
If you haven't used Kindle Vella yet, Chris really is the perfect person to start with. She's a fantastic writer. Kindle Vella, you can only use it on the apps. First 3 episodes are free. After that, it is tokens. Tokens are very cheap, and Amazon has made it very easy to get tokens now. Additionally, they're handing out tokens left, right, and center. You can always get free tokens. So don't let that dissuade you from checking out some of Chris's work. She's fantastic.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, listeners, thank you for joining in this episode, and hope you have a lovely rest of your evening.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Now it comes up with that pop-up that says the meeting is being recorded, and you get the got it or leave. And every time I'm just tempted to just be like, all right, leave.
I did not consent to this.
I don't consent to this thing that I agree to, this podcast I'm recording.